Welcome to the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I interview business leaders who are committed to their own growth and the development of everyone on their team. If you enjoy my podcast, be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast platform. Welcome back to another episode of the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and as you know, the focus of my podcast is geared to helping leaders develop themselves as well as highlighting people who have really done a great job of developing others. And today we're going to have a wonderful conversation around the self-development part of every leader. You're going to love this conversation, and I'm excited to welcome as my guest, Craig Dowden. Craig, welcome to my show.
Thanks so much, Meredith. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I've been really looking forward to this.
Oh, me too. And I want to share with my audience a little bit about who you are so they'll understand where we're coming from about this whole area of leader and self. Craig Dowden is the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and Amazon bestselling author of this wonderful book that I have here. It's called A Time to Lead. Listen to the subtitle, Mastering Yourself so you can master your world. He wrote this book with Alan Mulally, the legendary former CEO of Ford Motor Company and Boeing. Craig is a highly respected executive coach with the Forbes Coaches Council, as well as an award-winning speaker. And he has a wonderful podcast that I highly recommend. It's called Do Good to Lead Well, which is also the title of his first bestseller. And his podcast is rated in the top 0.5% of podcasts in the world. Each week, Craig speaks with top CEOs, fellow best-selling authors, and global thought leaders to share their experience and expertise with his audience. Craig has also been a regular contributor to top-tier leadership and business publications like Forbes, Fast Company, and Psychology Today. So, Craig, before we jump into all the wonderful ideas that you have in your book, I'd love for you to set a context for us around the work that you do with others so my listeners will understand where you're coming from.
Well, thank you for that very kind introduction. And I love the focus of your podcast, which is one of the many reasons that I'm excited to join you today. So I do a lot of executive coaching. So I do one-on-one executive coaching, or I'll coach teams of executives in terms of their self-development. Love the focus that you put right at the beginning. So really thinking about how can they be at their best so they can bring out the best in other people, and also being very clear on what the goals that are most important to them are, what they value and what their values are, and how to align their behaviors in that way. So that's really a strong emphasis of my coaching practice. And then from a speaking side, I do a lot of keynote speaking, and it's really focused around the science and practice of leadership, team, and organizational excellence. I'm passionate about the research. I love evidence-informed insights. And so I love working with clients either on a stage or in their organizations, really sharing a lot of those evidence-based tips, tools, and techniques that we can use in our day-to-day, and personal or professional, so that once again, we can have the impact that we desire.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about your first book and what that focused on. It was called Do Good to Lead Well. And then what was the impetus behind writing your second book?
Well, thanks for referencing the first book. I appreciate the chance to revisit that. And when I wrote Do Good to Lead Well, one of the fundamental questions that coaching conversations I was having and people in my network was really around struggling with the idea of, well, if I do good, if I'm a good leader, if I'm a positive leader, will the results suffer? So in order to get ahead and be successful, do I have to be ruthless? Do I have to step on people? Do I have to not care about my impact on others? And so that was the rallying question around the first book. And there was considerable social science, leadership science research that shows that doing the right thing is also the right thing to do for you as a leader and for your business. And how I oriented was really thinking about how we lead others. That was fundamentally that core question and some key practices that we can use. And then fast forward to my latest book, and it really started to germinate at the beginning of the pandemic when people were asking questions like, how are we going to get through this? Like, what are we going to
Mm.
do? How do we navigate these extraordinary waters? And underneath that, the question that was perhaps not being explicitly asked was, how am I going to get through this? And it
Mm.
really prompted me to land on this idea of great leadership starts with great self leadership. And so, what I wanted to do, once again, is take an evidence based perspective on how do we be at our best? How do we become our best selves? How can we show up in the best possible way, regardless of the context and situations we face? And so it was almost like yin and yang. The two books came together in that way. And I was really excited about sharing those ideas.
Mhm. Well, I really want to recommend people get your book because I thought it was an excellent read. And what I loved about it was that combination of, as you say, the evidence-based research without going into the weeds of dry academic sounding. You really brought every one of those studies to life and made it very practical. And then the stories you tell, with your clients. And then, of course, I want you to share how Alan Mulally contributed to this book because his contributions, I think, add a whole other dimension to it that make it unique among leadership books.
Well, and thank you, and appreciate the feedback on the approach. And that evidence-based perspective is really key for me. And with Alan, it was just such one of the most beautiful gifts in my life, unexpected that our paths crossed. And in my original formulation for the book, I wanted to have CEO masterclasses. So to bring the content to life, as you talked about, Meredith, I wanted to share a masterclass from a CEO, one of my coaching clients, people that I've worked with to showcase a particular situation. And as part of one of the chapters, I had written about Alan and the extraordinary turnaround that he engineered at Ford Motor Company. And he came to hear about the book and was interested in reading more and reached out and we started a conversation. And as I was speaking with Alan, he's just such an extraordinary human being, one of the most widely and highly respected CEOs of all time. And we just came together so powerfully around the idea of positive leadership. And so I asked him if he wanted to be involved. And in fact, would he be the CEO masterclass instructor? I couldn't think of, when I reflected, I was thinking, who better to run CEO masterclasses than Alan Mulally and his working together management system? And so he could share how the principles and practices and all of the remarkable success that he had, not just from a bottom line standpoint, also from an engagement standpoint and the positive impacts that he had around the world. So get him to lead it. And so what he did is take each of the qualities that are outlined in the book and then talk specifically about how he lived and led those qualities within his time at Boeing and Ford.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I found that not just inspiring, but you could really visualize how they did it. And that was one of the things I really appreciated in your book as well. And you cover these 7 qualities or areas that I think are so critical, and we can talk about several of them. We probably don't have time to dive deep into all of them. I would love for you to share, though, from your perspective, is there one of those 7 areas that you find a lot of your clients and other leaders struggle with compared to some of the others, or one or two? It doesn't have to be just one.
Well, so thank you for the back door of being able to do two, because I was trying to think of how can I, because there were two that I would like to touch on. And so thank you for graciously providing me that opportunity. I would say, and I'll answer this one from a research-based perspective, so it'll allow me to tap into my love for the evidence. Difficult conversations. There's been so much research around this. And some of it has come out of Stanford and other Ivy League universities that have shown that even for CEOs, difficult conversations is one of the most challenging things that they can undertake. And when you think of it, it's remarkable because in the organization, they sit in the highest level other than reporting to their boards, yet they still find it challenging. So I think the difficulty with difficult conversations is a lot of times our mindset around them and also the lack of practice, and in many ways that we avoid them. And so that's one area I would say that executives, aspiring executives, chief executives struggle with. The other one I would say, and it's why I purposefully close the book with it, which is around authentic leadership. Because, okay, what does authentic leadership mean? Who am I as a leader? And what do I value? And what are my values? I had the privilege of interviewing Doug Conant, the former CEO of Campbell Soup Company, and he engineered a remarkable turnaround as well. And I loved, I'll paraphrase his quote. He said, Craig, it's very difficult to lead with conviction if you have no idea what you stand for. And I just
Mm,
love that piece. And so I think for many, we show up, we react to situations, we react to things, yet really getting clear with ourselves in terms of our core values and who we want to be as a leader, the legacy that we wish to provide. That is an area where we almost assume it's happening, yet it's a much more complex and personal process. So that's why I wanted to close the book with that quality.
hmm Let's start there though, because I one of the things that I was found so interesting in that chapter was how people sometimes misunderstand what that really is. You know, that I get to let it all hang out, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so talk a little bit about why that's not the best approach and why what you really mean with authentic leadership and why that wouldn't be a part of it.
Well, thank you for pulling that out of that chapter because to me that's a really powerful idea and a misunderstanding, if you will, about the idea of authentic leadership. Because to me, what it does is over-index authentic and under-index leadership. Because when
Mm,
we're in positions of leadership, fundamentally what we're doing is having a positive impact on the environment around us, the people around us. And so a lot of times that idea of authenticity, in some ways, it's almost giving people to permission to act like a jerk, to just, well, I don't care. Well, that's not being a leader. That's not what's emulating what a leader is supposed to do. And so the critical part is to think about, so who am I? And then within the context of leading, be it my family, be it my team, be it my organization, whatever role I'm taking on as leader. And so I really wanted to bring more balance to that conversation and recognize then, okay, how do those things come into alignment?
hmm That makes so much sense because you're going to um, withhold saying some of those things that might come to mind. And that really ties into managing your emotions, right? Or mastering your emotions, which was another key area. And there was another point. This was one of the reasons I loved your book, Craig, because each chapter it was like, oh, yeah, that is another important piece that needs to be brought out that you don't read about everywhere. And the part in the managing or mastering emotions was around it's okay to feel anger. It's okay to feel negative emotions and not try to squelch those or I shouldn't feel that way. So, talk a little bit about the role that negative emotions can play in the overall context of mastering emotions.
Well, again, this is why I was so excited to join you because the things that you're picking out as being really interesting and intriguing, they're the parts that I was really excited to share in the book as well, because a lot of emphasis around emotion. So I'm a positive psychologist by training. So I'm a big fan of positive psychology. Yet, and this is one of the topics that came up as well during the pandemic, is there is such a thing as toxic positivity, where if all we do is focus on positive, 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 this is really not setting us up for success. And in fact, negative emotions have an extraordinarily important role to play in our lives for a full, rich, meaningful life, all of our emotions. are data points, and they tell us when things are in alignment and when things are not in alignment. And the more we try to minimize or avoid negative emotions, well, guess what? They don't go away because they're trying to raise their hands and go, hey, Meredith, look over here. This is something that requires your attention. This is something that I want you to look at more closely. And so recognizing that all of our emotions are valuable, taking off our judgment hat and now becoming more curious, kind of like an emotional detective, just trying to figure out what these emotions are trying to teach us. And in fact, what's really interesting is, and in conversations that I have, a lot of times the more irrational the emotion, we feel, well, it's irrational to feel that way. I shouldn't feel that way. So now I almost want to dismiss it or avoid it even more. And in my mind, in fact, the more irrational our emotional response, we want to become more, not less curious about it because we're recognizing there's a delta here that doesn't make sense. So once again, now through that observation, becoming an emotional detective, we can start making linkages that if we're judging ourselves for feeling a particular way, and I love that you highlighted people say, well, I shouldn't feel that way. No, we all can and should feel whatever it is that we're feeling. Now we have the responsibility to figure out what those emotions are telling us. And so
Mhm.
taking that perspective to it is so important, particularly in a world that's moving so fast, is so complex. We want to have as clear an understanding of what makes us tick from an emotional level than ever before.
I love that distinction between judging and curiosity because I think we can be so hard on ourselves, with this overall message of stay upbeat, look for the bright side, look for the positive. And the thing to me with emotions is when I get to having a strong feeling, what's the thought behind that?
Mhm.
Is one of the questions that I will ask as part of being curious. What was I thinking? Or what has happened? And what thought did I have associated with what happened that is now triggering this particular emotion? And I think that helps us slow down and take time to really think through before we say or do anything in response to it.
Well, and it's such a thank you for sharing that. And it's such a wonderfully powerful reflective technique that you're talking about. And I love that you mentioned, Meredith, slowing down and being curious around it and then saying, okay, what's underneath this? Once again, and what I love about how you framed it is that that's not a judgmental thing. It's just really about, okay, I just want to know. I just want to understand. And the thing is that if we don't slow down and ask ourselves those questions, become more curious about our emotional state, well, we're destined to repeat that reaction over and over and over again. So taking the time to slow that tape down and understand what was happening, what was the context, who was involved, how was I feeling, how much sleep did I have, all that kind of good things, they all become incredibly valuable data points now to better interpret our response in a particular situation and then to inform our responses in the future, especially if we showed up in a way that wasn't our best self.
Mm-hmm. Well, as we're talking about this idea of having an emotional reaction, sometimes it's related to a specific individual with whom we've had challenges in the past, whatever those might have been. And to me, this then ties in because all of your ideas and the seven qualities are interrelated. So, what I think is an interesting jumping off point from what we've just been talking about is the mindset and the growth mindset and how we see the world and therefore how we see ourselves and others. So, talk a little bit about the importance of having a growth mindset and what that is.
Well, and thank you for making that linkage. And I agree. And building off your example of depending on the kind of interactions we've had with a particular person, and you rightly point out, hey, so and I'll self-identify for me. Craig triggers me, right? In terms of how Craig shows up in a conversation. Well, now that's powerful because, and I'll link it back to the growth and fixed mindset. Now, if my operating assumption is Craig always does this or never does that, a fixed mindset, well, guess what? No matter what behaviors Craig exhibits, all leads back to the same conclusion time and time and time again. And we can
Mm.
have difficulty letting go and not being open to, okay, so what's going on here? A growth mindset takes in data and yet also looks at, so what's possible? What can we accomplish? And a lot of times, and there's lots of great research around this as well, we are naturally hardwired to respond to negative stimuli. It's unfortunate. There was a great review article in Psychology written about 20 years ago with the title Bad is Stronger Than Good. It's just a
Right.
natural human experience. And so we are wired to look for problems. We are wired to look for issues. And so what's wonderful about the growth mindset is to recognize our mindset as a choice and now start to think about, well, how can I broaden my perspective on something? So if Craig is operating in a particular way, if he does or says something nice, perhaps he is saying or doing something nice today, as opposed to just assuming, well, no, he's looking to try to manipulate me and get ahead. And one of my favorite, again, pieces of advice that I've heard is that, assume positive intent, which is
Yes,
another
I was just thinking
beautiful way
that. Mhm.
of a growth mindset. Assume there's a positive intent.
I think that's so important as a way of helping us open our minds about a specific person or a specific situation that maybe we've encountered in the past and we've responded a particular way that hasn't served us well, but we're kind of stuck in a rut of repeating that response because it's known to us. So, what are some things that a leader who's really interested in developing the growth mindset, what are one or two things that they might do that would be initial steps to, first of all, help them assess in any given situation, am I being really open or closed? Because to me, that's another way of talking about growth mindset and and not is this whole idea of, am I open to hearing more, seeing more than I have in the past?
Well, and I think one of the things building on what you've just shared, you're opening the door to that, which is, okay, who are the people where I tend to adopt a fixed mindset, and who are the people where I tend to adopt a growth mindset? So whereby I'm much more fixed and closed. So I love how you're doing open closed, and then write their names down on, on a sheet of paper, on an app on your phone. If you don't feel comfortable writing their names, their initials, or whatever you wish. And here's where it gets really interesting. Look at, are there particular patterns? So are there certain individuals that I'm more in growth mode or more open? And then are there certain individuals where I'm more closed? And now I can start to identify those patterns and see, okay, what triggers do I have in that space? And then also start to reflect on, and how does my mindset serve or not serve me in that situation? So
Mm.
very powerful. And a complementary exercise is also to think of situations. So on top of the people, think of situations. Are there certain situations where you're more open or growth oriented? Are there situations where you're more closed or fixed mindset? Once again, look for patterns. And I think that now becomes incredibly powerful once again, so we can see what our triggers are. And then the last thing I would say is sometimes there's a resistance or a reluctance to explore and sit with ourselves again in an open way, because we can misjudge that understanding does not equal agreement. So I think that's a really powerful idea for us, is that the more I can understand, and so by definition, that's growing. It's taking a broader view of a situation. It doesn't mean I have to agree with what this other person said or did or what's going on. What it does do, though, is now expand my understanding. It now broadens the different strategies I can use in this particular situation, and also better informs me how to navigate a similar situation in the future.
Hmm. You know, as we're talking about this, I'm thinking on a macro level, someone may have a tendency towards growth and fixed. But then on the individual situational or individual person level, that can vary a lot. And so, again, I don't think we want to label ourselves as one or the other. It's not that black and white, but I think it's helpful, as you were just suggesting, to take the time. All the things you're talking about. In fact, the whole focus of your book, this self, yourself, um, requires taking the time to learn about yourself.
Yes.
And we can't just be doing. We've got to slow down and look at, who am I being? And I loved the distinction you made. Really, I think it was either in the book or somewhere that I had seen. This book is more about being. Your first book was more about the doing as a
Yes.
leader. And so, who am I being in this moment with this person or with this situation? And does that serve me and them for me to respond this way?
Absolutely. And that's the really powerful piece as well. And coming back to the authentic leadership chapter, if you will, and being authentic, is
Mm.
that who am I in this moment? How is that aligning with my values, my beliefs, and my behaviors? And it's one of the many amazing insights that Alan shared with me was his definition of authentic leadership, which is when our values, beliefs, and behaviors are in alignment. The only thing people observe is our behaviors, and then they make conclusions, draw assumptions about our values and beliefs. And I love how you're framing it, Meredith, because now, by being more thoughtful, slowing it down, boring what you shared earlier, now I can think about, okay, who do I aspire to be as a leader? Who am I? Who is my best self? How do I want to show up in these situations? And now I'm more thoughtful about, so what am I saying right now? What am I doing right now? And how do those behaviors align with my values and my beliefs?
Mm-hmm.
Really incredibly powerful. And the more time we spend slowing things down, now, just like any skill, we get better and we get better and we get better. Yet it's not going to happen by doing without reflection.
Yeah.
Taking that time to take stock on who we are and how we show up is a critically important part to be successful as a leader.
Well, I love how these are kind of tying in, because one comment stimulates me thinking about one of your other areas, and this one kind of leads to strengths.
Hmm.
For someone to take the time to find out what their strengths are so they can leverage them to be more in alignment with who they really are. Because I believe our strengths are things that we have naturally, come to the world with, and then we've honed them over time so that we're really good at these particular areas. What
Mhm.
do you recommend for leaders in terms of ways to find out what their strengths really are? Because sometimes we have blind spots about our strengths as well as our areas we could make changes in.
For sure, and it's a universal human phenomenon. We all have the self-serving bias, and we all can have be blissfully unaware of our blind spots. And I love how you point that out. And sometimes what we think our strengths are may not be in alignment with what other people see. And so once again, having that growth mindset, that open perspective on things now allows us to have that possibility, to entertain that possibility that there may be a disconnection. And so, to your question, which is so important, there are a couple of ways. There are some fantastic strengths-based assessments on the market. You can purchase StrengthsFinder. So, the from Gallup, and well over 12, if not 15 million people have now completed the Strengths Finder, and you can get your profile, your 5 signature strengths through the purchase of the book. It's $25, and it provides a powerful framework to categorize your strengths. The VIA Institute on Character, it's a
I
free
love that
strengths
one.
assessment. I think it's absolutely dynamite, and it's free. You can pay for a more detailed version, yet you go online. And it is also one of the most empirically supported, powerful, insightful strengths-based assessment tools that you can use. And then another great exercise, and this comes out of the University of Michigan, the best reflected self exercise, which I love as well, is where you go to people. And if you really want to deepen a relationship and spark a conversation in the new year, is to say to someone, hey, I'd love to hear a story from you when you feel like I'm at my best. Like, when do you see me at my best self? When I'm at the pinnacle of my existence? And it's really cool to hear those stories from other people. And once again, not only are they motivating and inspiring to us, we also can gather lots of great insights because, once again, chances are there are going to be themes that we hear across those different stories. And it also feels good for the other person because they're validating and reinforcing what they value in us. And we can offer the same exercise in return. Hey, Meredith, if you would like to hear when I've heard you at your or seen you at your best, I'd be happy to do it. So it's just such a great way to make it an ongoing part of our conversation.
Mm-hmm. And I think that it might be wise to send that out in writing because some folks really want to take time to think about it. They're not ready to just come up with something off the top of their heads. And I remember several years ago just writing to a number of people who knew me well, I forget if I asked for 3 or 5 words you would use to describe me, in terms of my strengths. And that's another way of getting at that same information because we don't always appreciate. What I've seen, Craig, and I bet you've seen this too with your clients and maybe even yourself, is that the things we're so good at come so easily to us that we assume everybody else could do it.
Yeah.
A case in point, my husband is mechanical genius. He's a mechanical engineer, and there's no technical or mechanical issue that can come up in our house or a car or anywhere that he doesn't go, oh, goody. I can't wait because he has the confidence that he can solve any of it. Whereas I would look at it and just kind of go, okay, who can I hire to fix?
Yeah.
It's his superpower. He doesn't see it that way.
Right.
He just figures anybody could figure this out. And that's not the case. So I think having us learn what our strengths are and then appreciating how valuable they are to ourselves and to others is another step of that whole identifying your strengths.
Well, I love what you're saying, Meredith, and I couldn't agree more that because they do come so naturally, strengths almost, we can take them for granted. Exactly as you're saying, not even recognize the value we can bring to situations. And we tend to, once again, being wired towards the problems, what's wrong, right? The negative, that do we spend time thinking about and reflecting on, hey, who am I? What is my best self? Who am I at my best? And it's interesting. I love the story you're sharing because myself, as starting out in my coaching practice, one of the interesting things, one of my strengths is asking good questions. That's why I was interested in psychology. That's why I wanted to really pursue this career path. Yet, what was interesting is, particularly early in my coaching practice, I wasn't asking certain questions because I was assuming, well, that's an obvious question to ask. Or, is this wrong? Is it going to make someone put them on the spot or make them feel embarrassed? Like, oh, well, of course they had thought about it. And what was interesting, failing to recognize my own skill in asking questions and then leaning into that. And in fact, what I've found throughout my career is when I ask the most obvious quote unquote question, it's the most powerful because it hasn't been considered because it's so obvious. So again, it's recognizing how the things that you can take for granted can really be your superpower. And that was just a beautiful gift for me to have that insight from others who were sharing it with me through conversation. I was like, oh, that's so awesome. It's good to remember that because we can take ourselves for granted.
Yes. And I want to also make sure we talk about another one that I just love was mastering receiving feedback.
Mm.
Because I think that that can be a tough one as well to listen without getting defensive. But again, there was a particular angle you had in here that I thought, wow, that is really powerful. And that is providing the why, if you're going to seek feedback from others and ask, so we're not talking about a formal 360 written feedback, but if you're going to ask people individually, what's one thing I could do differently? Or what suggestion do you have to make it easier for you to work with me? That in itself can create problems.
Yes.
Without the context. So I would love for you to talk about what needs to precede the asking of that question.
Well, and again, this is just so much fun because you're touching on the topics that I am most excited about as well. And I love this idea. And as human beings, we are extraordinary meaning-making creatures. Like we need to make sense of everything. We're constantly in search of what does this mean? And now when you ask me that question, which can be quite a well-worded question, what's one change that you would like to see me make? Now, the part that's not appreciated, that we don't appreciate, that there's no context. So we know all the things that are going on behind the scenes. Yet for the receiver of that question, they're going, okay, how come Craig's asking me that? Is Craig trying to bait me into sharing something and then going to come down with the sledgehammer? Especially if I'm in a leadership role. If my boss comes in and says, hey, what can I do differently in this meeting? Nothing. Right? Because there's going to be so much pressure, like to step up and share that, and not being sure as well. Okay, like, are there specific things that Craig's looking for, or is there a certain way that I can package it? So now, guess what? When we're faced with all of that uncertainty and ambiguity, we're just going to take the safe route and just say, no, I'm not going to, it's not safe in the pool. I'm going to stay out of the pool. Now imagine the difference when I say to someone, hey, Meredith, in order for me to be at my best, I want to ensure that I'm having the biggest, the best positive impact that I can. And in order for me to do that, I need your input because I'm going to have blind spots. I know what my intentions are. You may receive that differently. And so I really trust your opinion. You're a really important part of my network. And in order for me to grow, I would love for you to share feedback with me. And I'm going to ask you questions from time to time. And here's how I want you to share that with me. Again, provide a roadmap for how you want to receive feedback. Some people just want to be hit right between the eyes with it. Don't softball it. Other people want to slowly build up to the critical piece. All are valid. Now imagine the difference. Now you know exactly why the person wants the feedback to be at their best. Also, that they trust and value you as a feedback source. And now I know exactly how to deliver it. So what it does is maximize the chances that the person's going to say yes, and also give me the highest quality feedback possible. And I think what's missing a lot of times is that we assume our intention is obvious. And this applies in difficult conversations as well. So it's a wonderful kind of parallel skill that you can apply in all of these domains, which is making the implicit explicit. Be very clear about our intentions. Hey, I'm about to embark on a difficult conversation. I want to raise something that's really important to me. We may have stark differences of opinion here. My goal is for us to figure out together how we can move forward and in a way that really aligns with the things that we both want, even if we have some areas of disagreement. So my intention is to have the most respectful, constructive, positive conversation possible. What do you think? Again, imagine that takes 30 seconds to set the stage, yet boom, now we open a door for a totally different level of dialogue.
I just love that. Yeah, I was going to circle back to the difficult conversations because you led with that in terms of the very first thing that you brought up. And I was curious because we all have that, whether it's at work, at home, or both. There are individuals, again, or situations where we are hesitant to speak up and hope it'll go away. And of course, it doesn't. And so, what are some things, again, looking at this, working on yourself, what are some things a leader can do to mentally prepare themselves? Like you just gave a great example of preparing the other person, for the conversation. But before we even get with that person, what preparation can we do in our own heads?
Well, and I love your focus again on that self preparation and growing ourselves, again, the beautiful theme of your podcast, to the best of our ability. And there's a lot of great preparation work that we can do. So we can ask ourselves key grounding questions like, what do I want out of this conversation for myself? What do I want out of this conversation for the other person? These are really critical questions. And what's beautiful about it is that you can look at it from your own lens because our needs are important. Then also your needs are important. If you and I are embarking on a difficult conversation, it's important to honor both of our needs. So asking those counterbalancing questions, really great way to get ourselves centered. And then I start to think about, well, now what do I want for the relationship? So the first two are kind of like, right, the players in the conversation, more micro, me and the other person. Then I say, what about our relationship at a macro level? Another really powerful grounding question. And then the last one being, well, how would I respond? How would I behave if I truly wanted those impacts? And it's a beautiful conversational framework from the book, Crucial Conversations. And asking ourselves those questions are incredibly important because now we've done the work and we can think through, plan out, okay, how we're going to engage in this particular discussion. And
Mm-hmm.
I think another thing that's valuable as well is early intervention is key. It's something if I were to see, and you touched on it as well, is that we leave it and leave it and leave it. I like to apply it in a medical setting. What do people say? As soon as you see something, there are symptoms developing, you don't wait, take immediate action. You catch it early. You hear that all the time. And one of the challenges we have at difficult conversations is we leave it. And now, just like in a medical context, the further along it goes, what do doctors and specialists say? Oh, I wish we had caught this earlier because now we have much more limited options. And the options are really difficult, are really challenging. They're uneasy and they have profound consequences. And so for us, if there is something that's there, if right away it's just, you've said something to me and it just didn't sit right. It's a great opportunity to go, hey, Meredith, just wanted to kind of, come back to the conversation. Yesterday you had said X, like may not have suggested anything. I just wanted to check in with you on that because I have to say it just landed awkwardly for me. Just wanted to put that out there. Awesome. Because then it could be, oh no, I didn't mean, and now it's course corrected, and now I understand. Or if there is something, now we're talking about it at a much lower emotional temperature rather than the 30th time this has happened. And
Mm-hmm.
now I show up with my truckload of evidence and I start naming off, every day for the last 2 months when you've done this, and the person's going, why didn't you talk to me about this 2 months ago?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you think of it being fair to you and the other person, because most likely if I'm the one with the accumulation of things that I've noticed, it's been eating away at me also. And, we do these rehearsals in our own minds anyway about these conversations. And I think sometimes, and I think you may have alluded to this in the chapter, we assume what another person is going to say or how they're going to react when we haven't even had the conversation to have the evidence that that's the case.
And thank you for raising that because to me, that's probably one of the most important things to remember. And then to build on what you're saying, this excellent insight that you're sharing, Meredith, and then we're judging the person for a conversation we haven't had with them. So we already
Exactly.
assume it's gone poorly. And now I'm mad that you weren't open to my point of view. And I haven't raised it at all. So that is the ultimate form of unfairness because, and this is critical, if I'm making a choice not to raise this issue with you, well, now it's outside of your awareness. How can I possibly hold you accountable for not responding to it and
Mm-hmm.
not paying attention to it? So now I have to let that go and go, you know what? Meredith is going to continue to say green. And that's, I'm not prepared to engage in that, and I can't. It's unfair to her to hold her accountable for that. And that's what's vitally important, is to remember that we can't hold people accountable for conversations we're unprepared to have with them, because
Mhm.
now it's damaging the relationship. We haven't even given them the chance to react in a quote unquote negative way.
Mhm. You know, as you're describing that, I'm thinking about The Power of Awareness by Neville Goddard,
Hmm.
where he has a chapter in there about well, I say the opposite. It's this woman who was having these negative conversations about a stage producer that she was working with. And he finally said, start visualizing him praising you and giving you positive feedback. And so, if we would spend our energy visualizing the outcome we want, which your questions help guide you to that point, when you ask about, the relationship and the just how we're each going to be, if you're picturing it going well, when I think about that for myself, honestly, Craig, I am coming to the conversation with a warm feeling towards that person, and
Yes.
they pick up on that. And so it really dissolves the tension when I can come at it in a way that is gracious because of how I have been thinking about the other person and what we want together and the outcome that I'd like to see.
Well, and again, when you're showing up in that way, that negative emotion, that the labeling, right, that comes with it, that's absent from that. And so once again, we pick up on things. And so that's removed from that conversation. And thank you, because it gives me a chance. I love how you're framing this, because it gives me an opportunity to reference other research around approach versus avoidance goals. When we approach a desirable state, it's much more motivating, inspiring, and much more likely for us to achieve it than when it's an avoidance goal. I don't want this to happen. And exactly as you're sharing, Meredith, is that, well, I'm moving towards a positive outcome. I'm working together. Let's borrow from our good friend Alan, right? How can we be working together towards a desirable future? And
Mhm.
now in that way, when I have that mindset, now this is direction that I'm moving, and I'm looking to make progress. I'm looking to make a connection. I'm looking to move our relationship forward. Now that feels good to me. And that's why our mindset, and why I opened the book with mindset, because that's foundational. You've touched on it earlier. Our mindset in a particular situation has a profound effect on how we interpret it.
Mhm. And the outcome.
Yes, absolutely. You're so, because then the strategies that we will use will be directly impacted by our mindset. So if I look at, this is never going to work, I guess, how many strategies am I going to use? Or they're never going to accept it. So even if I do try to propose a possible solution, I love your point around, well, what's my energy going to be like? How am I going to engage with them? How persistent will I be if I run into resistance? If my mindset is there, this is never going to fly, chances of it going ahead are pretty minimal.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, Craig, we could talk another hour. We're going to need to wrap up though. And I would love for you to share how people can connect with you, learn more about the excellent work you're doing with clients, and have you speak potentially for their group, and also get a copy of your book.
So they can get the copy of my book. So thank you. This has just been a boatload of fun. I was super excited. This exceeded how much fun, and I already had, like, this is going to be an awesome way to start the new year. So thank you for your time and your energy. They can find my book on Amazon or any of the other major online book retailers, and my website, craigdowden.com, is a great way to connect with me and have information about my articles and podcast episodes and all the things that I'm up to. So, or reach out on LinkedIn. I'm originally from Newfoundland, so I'm an open networker. So say Meredith sent you and you'd love to connect. I share your passion for positive leadership and how we can be at our best. So I love connecting with people who also share that passion. So LinkedIn is another great way.
Well, I would encourage all of my listeners to connect with Craig because he's just, as you could see in our conversation today, just so filled with wisdom and experience around effective leadership. And I loved that we went deep with this whole topic of the self. And want to give another plug to your book here, A Time to Lead. Please get a copy of that. It's just a profound read. And Craig, I want to just acknowledge you and thank you for who you are in the world and all the leaders that you have impacted through your coaching, your speaking, your books. I just think what you're doing is remarkable and I appreciate you.
Well, thank you. The feelings are mutual. I love the philosophy of your podcast and the energy you bring to making a difference. And as soon as we connected right away, that's one of the things that I feel most fortunate is that have the opportunity to connect with phenomenal individuals like yourself and have these really rich and deep, as you shared, conversations about the things that really matter to us in our personal and professional lives. So thank you for your commitment and the extraordinary success that you've had and how many amazing, I feel honored to be a part of the guest list that you've had because you've spoken to so many amazing people. And I'm not surprised they want to join you because of who you are. So thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you, Craig. I'm looking forward to staying in touch and continuing to support you in your work.
Same here. This has been a lot of fun.
Thanks for tuning in to my podcast. Now head over to growstrongleaders.com and check out our 2 books, Connect with Your Team and Peer Coaching Made Simple. While you're there, download the free facilitator guide to find out how to implement our unique peer coaching system. Until next time, I'm Meredith Bell.